Good evening, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. This is Rich again, back for your third and final video blog of the night for Friday, March 27th, 2015, around 8:17 p.m. in Billerica, Massachusetts. Cloudy out. Highs today were in the 30s. Tomorrow we could get some snow showers, but it's just going to stick to the grass and stuff like that. Maybe about a coating to an inch. Some news to report. The Atlanta Braves beat the Boston Red Sox by the score of 4-2 today in 7 innings rain, short and 7-inning game spring training. BU's men's ice hockey team beat Yale by the score of 3-2 in overtime in the NCAA men's ice hockey tournament North Regional semifinal in Manchester, New Hampshire. And Candy O'Terry, longtime DJ at Magic 106.7, has signed off the air for the final time after 25 years. Candy O'Terry's going into retirement. That's about it on the news. My third and final video blog subject of the night is my personality profile, and this starts off the 5-day stretch of famous professional athletes or people associated with Philadelphia sports. The first one is Paul Heyman, also known as Paulie Dangerously. Paul's famous for owning and operating and being the executive producer of ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, that was based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1993 to 2001. Paul Heyman is also a famous professional wrestling manager and commentator and booker. Paul Heyman was born in Scottsdale, New York, and he was born to a lawyer and his mother's a survivor of the Holocaust. And Paul is Jewish, and he grew up in a Jewish family, and Paul was a big professional wrestling fan when growing up. He watched WWF wrestling from New York, which was seen on Channel 9, WWOR. When Paul was very little, he wanted to be involved in the world of professional wrestling. When he was a teenager, Paul would go to Madison Square Garden at the house shows for WWF, and he would do photography. He owned his own he had his license to photograph the matches, and he became real close with many of the wrestlers, like the managers like Captain Lou Albano, Fred Blassie, the Grand Wizard, and others. And also he developed friendships with Larry Zbyszko and the other wrestlers and stuff like that. And when Paul grew a little older, he worked for the famous Studio 54 as a promoter and a manager and a photographer. And he also got Ric Flair to go to Studio 54 to have a wrestling card there, and it featured the debut of Bam Bam Bigelow. Paul Heyman started his wrestling career as a manager in 1986 in several North Regional promotions, and he used the name Paulie Dangerously because he got the idea from the name Dangerously because it was a movie that came out in 1984 called Johnny Dangerously, starring Michael Keaton of Mr. Mom and Batman Returns fame. And Paul E. Dangerously moved from the Northeast Regional promotions to Championship Wrestling from Florida. He managed there for a few months. He aligned himself with Kevin Sullivan. Then he went to Memphis, Tennessee, the CWA, and he managed Tommy Wildfire Ridge and Austin Idol, and they had a famous feud with Jerry the King Lawler. They had that infamous match where Austin Idol wrestled Jerry the King Lawler, and Tommy Rich was under the ring, and that was the match where Jerry Lawler lost his hair in a haircut match. The fans almost rioted there at the Mid-South Coliseum. Paul E. stayed a few months in CWA, then moved to the AWA, and he managed the original Midnight Express, which was Randy Rose and Dennis Condrey, and they won the AWA World Tag Team Championship. And Paul was a great speaker on the mic. He had great mic skills. Then in 1988, he bounced around a few regional territories like Continental in Alabama, Windy City Wrestling, managing such wrestlers as Eddie Gilbert, Bam Bam Bigelow, and a few others. And he developed some of the creative side of the wrestling when he was in those regional territories. In the fall of 1988, Paul went to WCW, and he managed the original Midnight Express, Randy Rose and Dennis Condrey, and they feuded with the Midnight Express, which was beautiful Bobby Eaton and Sweet Stan Lane with Jim Cornette, and they made an awesome debut on WCW Saturday Night when Paulie attacked Jim Cornette with the cell phone. Cornette had a tennis racket, and Lassie had his cane, and Mr. Fuji had his cane. All the heel managers has kind of weapons, and Paulie was no exception. And the Midnight Express feud was pretty good, but it didn't last too long because of the politics and WCW and stuff. And then the original Midnight Express left, and then Paulie stuck around to manage Jack Victory and the Samoan SWAT team, which was Samu and Fatu, who became Rikishi and stuff like that. Paul stuck around WCW for about 3-4 years. He managed Mean Mark Callis, who became the Undertaker, and he also was a commentator on WCW Saturday Night. Then in the fall of 1981, Paul E. Dangerously formed the Dangerous Alliance, a faction that included Ravishing Rick Rude, Stunning Steve Austin, Beautiful Bobby Eaton, the Enforcer Arn Anderson, Larry the Cruncher Sabisco, and Medusa. The Dangerous Alliance was a faction that replaced the Four Horsemen as the #1 heel faction in WCW, and it lasted about a year, and it was very successful. But by the fall of 1992, WCW fired Paul E. Dangerously, and Paul E. Dangerously was going to go out of the wrestling business, but he stuck around, and he got in a new regional promotion in the northeast part of the United States, Eastern Championship Wrestling. Paulie Dangerously had formed the ECW version of the Dangerous Alliance, which was Eddie Gilbert, the Magnificent Don Morocco, Superfly Jimmy Snuka, and the Dark Patriot, who is Doug Gilbert, Eddie Gilbert's real-life brother. And the Dangerous Alliance was around a few months. Then Paul Heyman managed other wrestlers like the franchise Shane Douglas and Sabu and 911, but while he was managing, Paul backstage was doing the creative side of ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling, which had evolved into Extreme Championship Wrestling. Paul eventually phased out his Paulie Dangerously role and then went backstage to produce and write and handle all the bookings for ECW. Paul was the main man of ECW for the time it was in existence. He eventually got the company in mid-1996 from Todd Gordon, and he got all the money he did to buy ECW from his parents, especially his mother. Paul lived with his mother and father until he was in his mid-30s. That's a fact, Jack. And ECW prospered. It was the third biggest wrestling promotion in the United States in the 1990s and early 2000s. Paul did everything, book and write and produce and stuff like that, and handled all the financial stuff, but he was overtaxed and stuff. He was kind of a one-man show doing that. He had some help with other ones, but eventually ECW crashed and burned because of Paul Heyman not being good on the checkbook. Checks were getting bounced and stuff. They got TV deals, but they didn't last too long. By 2001, ECW was bankrupt and went out of business. So Paul Heyman jumped to the WWE to become a commentator on Monday Night Raw. He replaced Sherry the King Lawler for about like 8 months or so. Paul was a great heel commentator. While he was doing that, he was doing backstage booking, writing for SmackDown and stuff. Paul Heyman was part of involved in the Alliance Invasion story angle, and he did a kind of a work shoot interview on Vince McMahon. And a week before Survivor Series 2001, which was pretty great. The next night on Raw after Survivor Series, Paul Heyman was fired, and he would try to attack JR, and JR was beating him like that. Funny. That was so funny. Paul was off television for about 4 months, but he returned in March 18th, 2002 to manage Brock Lesnar, the next big thing. Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman were pair by pair, and Paul's promos with Brock Lesnar were amazing and stuff. Paul was one of the last managers to talk for his wrestlers, which was pretty good. And also, Paul Heyman was doing a lot of the writing for SmackDown, and he was doing great writing for SmackDown and stuff, but he had odds with Stephanie McMahon and Vince McMahon over stuff, because they run the company, and Paul couldn't push what he was pushing in ECW to the WWE, because the head has to go through Vince and Stephanie, and if they don't like anything, they'll change it. And Paul was mad about that. Paul managed Brock Lesnar to the WWE title in 2002, but eventually turned on him at Survivor Series 2002. Then he managed the Big Show for a month as WWE champion, and when Big Show lost to Kurt Angle, Paul Heyman managed Kurt Angle for a while, so he managed 3 straight WWE champions. Like this happened several years before, in 1996, when Sonny managed 3 WWE Tag Team Champions in a row. That's amazing. Eventually, Paul got phased out of television again to do more backstage writing in March 2003, but he came back on screen in October 2003 as the general manager of SmackDown, which was pretty good. And then he was on it for several months, but then he was written off television for a while. He came back to manage the Dudleys and Hyde and Ride on screen, but like in the winter of 2005, Paul was demoted to OVW, which was then the developmental territory of the WWE, and he helped create stuff. He was there for a year, and he helped create a lot of good stuff for OVW. When ECW was returning in 2006 as a third brand for WWE, Paul was named creative and in charge of that ECW brand, but he always had heads with Vince McMahon on stuff and Stephanie McMahon. Paul was removed as creative writer of ECW in December 2006, and then soon WWE and Paul Heyman parted ways, and this is when Paul Heyman got out of the business for a few years for WWE, and he did the Heyman Hustle and stuff. There was a rumor in 2010 that Paul Heyman was on the verge of joining TNA. In fact, he had a plan that he proposed to Dixie Carter, a 5-year plan for TNA, that if he got control of the TNA booking committee, he wanted to be the head of booking committee for TNA. He would have a 5-year plan. The first 18 months he would evaluate the TNA roster, and the next 18 months he would build the TNA roster to compete with the WWE, and then by the third year he would have TNA to go public on the stock market. And he said by the age of when it was done in 2015, when he was 50 years old, he would cash in and retire. I think he proposed that to Dixie Carter, who was the president of TNA. She didn't really like that plan, so Paul Heyman did not go to TNA. And in 2012, Paul Heyman returned to the WWE as spokesperson for Brock Lesnar and stuff. And he's been with the WWE ever since in a managerial role, only talking for Brock Lesnar. Plus, he's been like managing other wrestlers like CM Punk and Cesaro and others. Paul Heyman's the last great wrestling manager left ever, and he might be the last one because he's a great talker and stuff, and he's famous for quotes and stuff. I loved his Paulie Dangerously character, him smacking the telephones and stuff like that. He's known for like, and he was a great commentator. He was a great heel commentator in my opinion. He's not up on par with Bobby the Brain Heenan or Jerry the King Lawler or Jesse Ventura, but he's probably the next tier of stuff like as heel commentators. I'm very surprised that he wasn't used more often for a heel commentator after he got fired from like the invasion angle. He could have came back as a heel commentator on SmackDown and stuff, but probably was busy writing and stuff. He was great creating with the writing stuff for ECW. ECW had great storylines. Paul Heyman's master of that, master of a lot of things, three-way dance and stuff, but he ran ECW by himself with little help. He should have, had like a financial team with him and stuff like that when he owned ECW, but he just wanted to do everything by himself. And when he was writing for WWE, he butted head a lot with Vince and Stephanie McMahon, and he got in trouble with that, which is pretty sad. But if Vince and Stephanie run the WWE, and everything has to be approved by them storyline wise, and if they don't like something, they won't go with it. And everybody's famous for saying, I'm a Paul Heyman guy, and many people are, and I steal the Paul Heyman guy when I always say I'm a Julie Broughton guy, which Julie Broughton is Local 6, Orlando, Florida. But, Paul Heyman's one of a kind, and he's probably going to be a WWE Hall of Famer when he finally retires from the world of professional wrestling. I got a DVD of Paul Heyman. My Name is Paul Heyman, and it's a great DVD from WWE. Hopefully one of these days he could write a book. And that's about it on Paul Heyman, and everybody's a Paul Heyman guy. Well, I'll be back tomorrow, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You're going to get 3 more video blogs. First video blog will be about my review of WrestleMania 16. And then I'm going to talk about BMHS, Bellacca Memorial High School. And the third and final video blog of the night will be about Baseball Hall of Fame third baseman and one of the best Philadelphia Phillies players of all time. I'm talking about Michael Jack Smith, number 20, the Baseball Hall of Famer, for my week of Philadelphia sports athletes. Sunday's going to be about Philadelphia Flyers center and senior vice president Bobby Clark, a legend in Philadelphia hockey. Monday's going to be about Allen Iverson, the answer, and Tuesday's going to be about Donovan McNabb. WrestleMania reviews will continue until I get to WrestleMania 20, and then there's going to be features next week about old regional territories in professional wrestling. It's going to be starting with the WWF from 1963 to 1983, when it was a Northeast promotion owned by Vincent James McMahon. Good night, everybody. See you tomorrow.